Kelly is the first person, fun fact, to graduate from college. And last but not least, my dear friend and colleague, Mr. Jay Pang. Jay Pang is the Deputy Chief in the General Crime Section of the Criminal Division here in the U.S. Attorney's Office. Prior to joining the office in 2019, Jay worked at Boy Schiller Flexner in Los Angeles. He also worked at Latham and Watkins in San Francisco and clerked for the Honorable William Alsop in the District Court in San Francisco. Jay graduated from UCLA Law in 2013. And with that, I'll turn it over to my colleague Josh, who will be moderating today.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Josh Lee. I'm actually a pretty new AUSA in the General Crimes Division. And the way I want to moderate, and I'll be the moderator for this panel, but the way I want to moderate is I'm going to start by asking a few questions to our esteemed panelists, and then we'll open it up to you all, the audience, if you have any questions for the panelists. So we'll start with the softball for Martine. Beyond being appointed by the president, what made you come back to the U.S. Attorney's Office as a U.S. Attorney?
Okay, well, I love softball, so this will be a good one to start with. Thank you all for being here. Really appreciate your attendance here with us. Our office is always open to our community members and people to learn more about, so we look forward to having you here and having you learn more about the U.S. Attorney's Office. So I was an AUSA for about 8 years. I did organized crime work. I was very passionate about that work. It was work that I really felt strongly about. And that's because the work was victim-driven. That's what I always talk about, the work we do here. We focus on victims and vindicating victims, whether that be in the areas of fraud, violent crime, corruption, national security, you name it. That's the work of our office. So when I had the opportunity to come back here, it's a little bit of a pay cut, but that didn't matter because it was well worth it, because the work we do here is so critical. What you're going to learn here today is about some of the work we do. We serve the largest district in the entire country. It's not even close. Second place ain't even close. We're almost at 20 million people. So it's a huge area. But in addition to the population, it is the most diverse area in the country. And that's diverse in every sense of the word, in terms of its people, in terms of geography, in terms of its industry, socioeconomics, everything is here. And that's why it's such an interesting place to practice. You'll see in the last few weeks, we've done all kinds of different types of cases that you'll see in the news, from public corruption, to national security, to cyber cases, to violent crime cases. We do it all here, which is what made it an easy decision to come back. That's one. But the second big reason is we have the best attorneys and staff in the country. We have remarkable attorneys who are not only incredibly intelligent, I'm not just saying that because they're here with me, who are incredibly intelligent, but incredibly driven and passionate about the work that they do. And I think that'll come across through this panel today. They very much care about helping victims. They very much care about their community. They very much care about making this district a better place. So I think you're going to hear a lot of that through the panel questions today.
And Martine, what are some of your priorities as a U.S. Attorney's Office in leading the Central District of California?
So as you could glean from my earlier comments, my priorities are to focus on cases where victims' rights are implicated. So we have prioritized work, for instance, in civil rights and corruption. We've done a lot of work in that area across the board. When I say civil rights, I mean that very expansively. We do criminal civil rights, we do civil rights work as well, and that is all very important work, and our office has had great success in those areas in the past few years. Another important priority area is in the fraud sphere, and fraud both in terms of going after the most powerful corporations, executives that engage in fraud. I started a strike force to address that specifically, which is doing great work. But also the fraud that affects our most vulnerable community members. whether that be immigrant communities, indigent individuals, older adults. We have something called the Vulnerable Communities Task Force, which is a very important thing that our office has focused on, and we've done excellent work in that area. Another priority is violent crime, that'd be violent gun crime or human trafficking. We've started specific initiatives in those areas. This is a remarkable time in our country and in our state in the sense that we have these increases in violent crime. And I was with the FBI a few weeks ago. We were talking about statistics and some of the statistics that have been coming out. While the rest of the country may or may not be having declines in violent gun crime, we are certainly increasing in this area. In fact, when you talk about violent gun robberies, we are about 3 times the national average. So it's very important for our office to get involved in that work, to surge in that work, and that's something we've been doing. It's very much a priority of mine. And it's a priority both in our violent crime section and in our general crime section, which is doing a lot of work in that area. And then the final thing I'll highlight is national security. National security affects all of us. It's a very important, it's a critical area. We're dealing with threats from various different sectors, whether that be foreign actor threats, whether that be terrorist organization threats, but also domestic terrorism threats. We did a case a couple weeks ago against a neo-Nazi group. It was the largest domestic terrorism takedown in the history of the country. And that's the kind of work that we need to keep doing to make sure our communities stay safe.
Thank you, Martin. My next question goes to Roger. You are a deputy chief with the Major Frauds Division or section, and you are also the healthcare fraud coordinator. Could you please tell the audience what exactly Major Frauds is and what your role is as a healthcare fraud coordinator?
Sure. First, I want to give a thank you to Sean Herrera for kind of helping organize and the RSVPs. And I commend you all for taking the time this evening to come out. I know I came to some of these events years ago before I started in the office in 2017. So thanks. So I serve as a deputy chief in Major Frauds, and we handle large white-collar investigations. As a healthcare fraud coordinator, I focus on large fraud schemes that target Medicare, Medicaid, things like that. So some of the cases that you might have seen in the news that our office handled recently, very timely. On Friday, the Dodgers will play the Yankees in the World Series. And our major fraud section that recently handled the prosecution and speedy conviction of Shohei Ohtani's interpreter. So you may have read about that in the news. And recently, another case from our section that went to trial, a lot of media regarding this well-known attorney's wife was Tom Girardi. So I'm not from the LA area, but living here for the past decade plus, Tom Girardi was really a pillar in the legal community. And he's exposed, and as Martine said, really took advantage of vulnerable victims. So as an attorney, the first rule is you don't steal from your clients. And some of those clients who were badly misfigured, he stole from and spent on lavish country clubs, private jets, his wife's entertainment career. So Major Fraud, we focus on kind of these large-scale white-collar crimes. And it's not always the case, but it feels rewarding because oftentimes the individuals that you're targeting in major frauds are those that come from means, those that have educational backgrounds and talents, but choose to use these skills in not the right way. As healthcare fraud coordinator, I get to coordinate with different agencies, including the FBI, Department of Health and Human Services, and kind of dig into some really large-scale schemes that target Medi-Cal, a program that gives insurance to the needy, those without funds. And then lastly, I'll just briefly mention this front office has been very supportive of diversity. I'm proud to serve as one of the diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility co-chairs to make this office a more accessible place for all, to take the front office's priorities to hire the best and the brightest and the most diverse, and kind of promote them within the office and kind of celebrate that diversity in the office.
Thank you, Roger. I appreciate that. My next question goes to Susan Har. She's an AOSA in the Public Corruption and Civil Rights section. You're also a hate crimes coordinator. Could you briefly describe what the Public Corruption section is, as well as your role as a hate crimes coordinator?
I'll try, but Rogers was so good. I feel intimidated now. All right. So public corruption and civil rights, it is sort of as it sounds. There's sort of two components to it. The public corruption aspect are investigations and prosecutions of public officials or people who would seek to corrupt public officials in sort of any wide swath of what I call criminal abuses of the public trust. So bribery is sort of most classic, but it can be wire fraud, it can be obstruction, it can be RICO schemes. And I like that Martine kept folding in corruption to the victim-centric mission of this office, because there can be this misconception that public corruption is a victimless crime. And I'm a very firm advocate that that's not the case at all. And in fact, the victim is our democratic system. It is the institutions that this country is built on, because when officials trade out their fiduciary duties for personal gain, these people who've elected them, that is the ultimate betrayal of democracy. So I think that the work we do is very important to hold those cases out, hold those people accountable. That's sort of the PC side of PCCR. CR for civil rights, that encompasses, I'd say, kind of twofold. One is similarly the investigation, prosecution, and holding accountable largely law enforcement officers for their abuses of their duties and responsibilities. These can be excessive force cases. These can be other types of abuses that they use their position to commit other crimes, like smuggling contraband into prisons, things of that nature. And civil rights also encompasses hate crimes, which is also the role that I have as a coordinator. And so we have prosecuted very significant hate crimes in this district in partnership with other sections, of course. And that would include things like David Cho, who is the shooter from the Laguna Woods Church from a couple of years back, where one person was killed, 5 others were shot. And there was also a lot of attention recently and a very successful resolution with a shooter who, on 2 different occasions, shot 2 Jewish men for virtue of their race and status. So those are obviously very important cases as well. And as the hate crimes coordinator, I work with agents to help sort of field questions, legal questions, things like that. But we also do, I also do a lot of community engagement. And that's kind of another thing that I think that this U.S. Attorney in particular has really brought to the forefront in this administration. Previously, that hadn't really been something that was, I think, front of mind for AUSAs. But it makes a lot of sense that we would want to, we're here to serve the community. So it would only make sense that we want to engage with them. We want to let them know that we are here to stand up for them. There can be a lot of distrust. There can be some sensitive areas when it comes to law enforcement, FBI, and certain marginalized communities, and whether we're really there to speak up for them and to advocate for them. And it's really important in my role as hate crimes coordinator to communicate that we're not here to only defend certain types of people. That's not what we're here for. We're here to uphold the rule of law. We're here to make sure that anyone who's a victim of any of these federal crimes, they're going to see justice is done through our work.
Thank you, Susan. That's very much appreciated. Next up is Kelly Ng. She's a AUSA in the Violent and Organized Crime section, a section that's a little bit different from frauds and PCCR. Could you briefly describe what violent and organized crime does, as well as, and you were also a former coordinator for Project Safe Childhood, so if you could just briefly describe what that is as well.
Sure, of course. Also, thank you so much again for everyone for joining us today. So violent and organized crime, or VOX as we like to call it, Martine talked about this in his comments. So it's everything from going after large gangs, such as the one he just described, the neo-Nazi, the gang, the Peckerwoods, and charging them with statutes such as RICO, as you heard Susan allude to, the Racketeer Influence and Corruptions Organization Act. Basically, it goes after gangs who commit a large variety of crimes, everything from violent crimes to drug trafficking, to firearms trafficking. It's one way to go after a gang and really cause disruption in the communities that they harm. VOX is also pretty broad because on the other side of that, we do the child exploitation prosecutions. And that ties into my work as the prior Project Safe Childhood Coordinator for our office. So the Project Safe Childhood initiative is something across all of our U.S. attorneys' offices in the country, and it's really to combat the proliferation of child exploitation, especially as we see it online. After the pandemic, there was a sharp increase in the number of child exploitation incidents, and it's just the fact that the phone is such a powerful tool, and most kids have it these days. And for child predators, they don't have to go to the playground anymore to find their victims. All they have to do is be on their phones. So with such a large increase in the number of child exploitation investigations, our law enforcement partners at the FBI, HSI, which is Homeland Security Investigations, and a lot of our local law enforcement partners, they will bring cases to our office, the PSC coordinator. And so our job was to help with intake, with internal as well as agency education and community outreach. So I would talk with law enforcement agencies about what cases they had, what's a good case for federal adoption, if there were cases that were not ready to be assigned to an AUSA, what could we do to build up those investigations before they could find a home with an attorney in our office. The other part of PSC was also education. So like Susan was saying, as the hate crimes coordinator, sometimes a lot of law enforcement officers would call me and they would ask just kind of legal questions, or what can I do to make my search warrant more powerful. And of course, there are other AUSAs who are in our general crime section who get a child exploitation case and they have questions about how do I prosecute this, what type of plea should I extend. Sometimes more senior AUSAs have questions about how to handle tricky issues in sentencing. And then of course the community outreach component of PSC was so important. Again, it's important to talk with students who have these powerful tools, go out to schools and tell them just to be very careful about what they post about themselves on social media, especially if they post it publicly. We just want them to be really careful about what they're sharing online, how to, really practical tips about not sharing their location, making their friend list private. But also the reality is a lot of these students, we try to teach them, don't send vulnerable images of yourself out there. And if you have, it's not the end of the world. We also just want to make sure that they know that us as law enforcement, we're a safe space. So if anything has happened to them, they shouldn't be intimidated by us. We want them to come to us because we're not here to judge them, we're here to protect them. So those are the components of the Project Safe Childhood Coordinator role.
Thank you, Kelly. And finally, last but not least, Jay Pang, who is my current supervisor, Deputy Chief of General Crimes, and had actually a diverse range of experiences in different sections. I know you're a major frauds, the international narcotics section, and now you're Deputy Chief of General Crimes. Since we already talked about frauds, do you mind expanding upon the international narcotics section as well as your role now as Deputy Chief of General Crimes?
Sure. So I'll start with general crimes. General crimes is where you go to learn on how to become a prosecutor and how to try cases and how to investigate cases. But ultimately what general crimes is, it's the tip of the spear. We take the hardest cases in the office. We really take on the cases that sometimes, as Martine said, we have a real drive and increase in the amount of violent crimes our community has in terms of robberies, in terms of folks who not just are felons and who have guns, but use guns in furtherance of other crimes. And those are the types of cases that we're having our general crimes ASAs prosecute to great effect. And I would say a couple years ago, our office, one way we identify high-profile cases is through our press releases. And just a few years ago, it was senior section AUSAs in our public corruption section, our major fraud sections. They'd have kind of the bulk of the press releases. And now we have general crimes AUSAs like Josh, who's going to go to trial in November on a really by operating a small business. They're the ones with the press releases. They're the ones who are really hearing out the victims, making sure the victims are heard. They're the ones who are trying the really hard cases that sometimes the DA's office won't take, and we take on, and we make sure that the victims get their day in court. That's General Crimes. Super fun. Hope you guys enjoy this. Once you leave General Crimes, you'll go to a senior section. And one of the senior sections is our International Narcotics, Money Laundering, and Racketeering section. And like in Vox, we deal with organized crime. A lot of the cases overlap. We deal with a lot of violent and organized crime. I did a couple RICO trials as well involving the Mexican mafia, but we also deal with international drug traffickers who launder proceeds. In Miller recently had one of the top 5 OCDETF cases involving Chinese money launderers who were laundering funds obtained from drug trafficking like across the world, and those are like nationally covered cases, and those are the types of cases that we do.
Thank you, Jay.
Yes.
Appreciate it. Now let's open it up to, oh, by the way, he's co-chair of the hiring committee, so he's the guy to know. Let's open it up to the entire panel now. Could you, and I have a very specific question for Martine actually, but for everyone else, what are some significant and serious cases or interesting cases that you have personally worked on? And for Martine, what do you miss most about being on Line A, let's say?
They should go first.
Yeah.
You guys go first.
Sure. So this past summer, I worked on a fentanyl overdose trial, and I think the likelihood of someone in this room who has been impacted by the fentanyl overdose or the fentanyl crisis is pretty high. Our office is doing something about that. So in our case, we had an 18-year-old victim who was experimenting with drugs. And so he bought what he thought was one drug on a website called OfferUp, but it turned out to actually contain fentanyl. He took it overnight, and the next morning, his father was supposed to come over and help him with his homework, and that's when he found his son passed away from an overdose. Now, we were able to work with the DEA to find the person who poisoned our victim with the fentanyl, and we prosecuted him. We took him to trial this past summer, and the jury reached a guilty verdict. To me, that was the most impactful case I've worked on by far, because I joined the case ever since it was indicted. I had talked with the family very often, just giving them guidance, because this is the first time they had ever been involved in the justice system, to really hold their hand along the way, and to also let them know we care about their family's case. And so they were incredibly brave throughout trial. They had to testify, and after over 2 weeks of just a grueling period of hearing the other side attack their son's character, when really he was an 18-year-old kid who was experimenting, and he was poisoned. And so after their bravery and their testimony and their grit to push through, the jury ultimately convicted the defendant, and now they finally get to see justice for their son. I still have a very close relationship with the family. I talked to them earlier today. So to me, that's by far the most rewarding thing I've ever worked on in this office.
Thank you, Kelly. And I'm not sure if you know, it might be a question for Martine, but fentanyl overdose death resulting cases priority of the office?
So death resulting cases are a major priority for the office. In the past 2 years, we've done over 60 of those cases. There's one famous one that you all might have heard of, a famous actor who passed away. But the other 60 victims were not famous, but every life matters to us, and we treat them all the same. So it is a major priority. Since I'm already speaking, I'll tell you about what I miss, and it's exactly what Kelly was saying. Be able to go all in on one case, know it backwards and forwards, really dedicate yourself to one particular matter, get to know the victims, get to know the witnesses. I can't do that in my role. I have more of a, maybe scattershot is the better approach, where I'm involved in just every single case we have, more in the high profile cases, but just about every case I have to be involved in. So that necessarily means I know the cases at a more superficial level than the AUSAs do, and that's something I miss, being able to get really deep into a case. but now that I've reminisced, you all should talk about the good part of the cases you do.
Okay, well, I'll sort of just briefly summarize a big case that I have been on, but then I'll sort of talk about the aspects of it that make it really fun. So this is the prosecution of what we call Casino Royale. It is this sprawling pay-to-play scheme that was uncovered happening in the city of Los Angeles that centered on Councilmember Jose Huizar, who was positioned to have a lot of power over these multi-million and sometimes billion-dollar development projects. And he effectively used that power that he had of his elected office to trade it in for benefits and bribes of all manner of kind, including, you know, really luxurious and exorbitant trips to Las Vegas, to Australia, just straight up cash, campaign contributions, all in exchange for, you know, his official acts. And this case had a lot of different tentacles. We do not just go after the public officials who commit these crimes, we also go after the bribe payors who would offer or provide and participate in these schemes. But I want to highlight something about the work in this office is that you do every aspect of these cases, and that is just extremely rewarding and fun and challenging and exciting. So in that case alone, I've handled multiple trials. We, you know, obviously as the AUSA, you are it. You are choosing the jury, you're giving the jury addresses. I am examining cooperators, tricky witnesses, uncooperative witnesses. That's all you. You know, we're handling the sentencings. One of the cases already went up to the Ninth Circuit. I did the appeal. You argue, you know, before the Ninth Circuit. You get so many of these great opportunities. And even just in the last 3 weeks, I advocated for a sentence of a deputy mayor who was sort of the second in command of this scheme, and he got a 12-year sentence. And, you know, 2 weeks after that, I wrote a paper, and I will be advocating for a probation sentence for our key cooperator, who, you know, worked with us for 6 years and gave us extremely valuable, significant assistance. Because that is also a way that we deter crimes. We need to incentivize cooperators to bring us information and to flip so that we can build these cases. So there's just so many different components, right? Our job is not to just drop the hammer and get the highest sentence or what have you. There's a lot of these people were, their cases were resolved in a manner of a bunch of different ways. And that's sort of like the beauty and the strategy of what we do here, but all with the same goal, right, which is to uphold the rule of law, have accountability, and vindicate victims' rights.
Thank you.
I'll go with 2 cases from major frauds just to show you both ends of the spectrum. One that I took to trial in 2021 was a large $1.8 billion customs fraud case, which involved a Chinese national billionaire with a publicly traded company on the Hong Kong Stock Exchange. So it involved securities fraud, so lying in your prospectus, and, you know, as investors, you look at annual reports, lying about the demand for aluminum in the United States from China, and then smuggling 2 million aluminum pallets into the United States to evade $1.83 billion in customs duties, and then laundering billions of dollars around the world. Basically selling pallets to himself from China to the US and calling those real sales, and then just circling the money from one entity back to the other. And like Susan said, part of it, you gotta handle everything, right? The trial preparation, you're dealing with sophisticated law firms on the other side oftentimes. It was really stressful in the moment, but kind of looking back, I think those are some of my biggest growth opportunities, as we like to call them, and kind of growth as a person and as a lawyer. And I was able to handle the case is so old, so my colleagues have gone on to greener pastures, so I was able to kind of handle the appeal, and thankfully it was remanded for us. I'll handle the argument at a remanded restitution hearing in February. On the other end of the spectrum, it kind of really makes me resonate with Kelly, case I handle major frauds. Really below our loss thresholds, about $175,000. Typical general crimes fact pattern, someone's identity was stolen, used to open up accounts and kind of drain different credit cards and bank accounts. However, this was no ordinary victim. This victim in the Los Angeles area, her mother and brother were murdered. Father tried to kill her and then killed himself. So this was well publicized in the LA area in around 2019. The daughter escaped through a window, through her bedroom, through the bathroom window. So her whole young woman in her 20s, her whole immediate family has all been killed. And instead of grieving and trying to get on, you know how frustrating it can be to deal with the bank, right? Or, you know, customer service representative is not hearing you. This person, her parents' phones were taken over within days. You know, you have to call and get that password. They took over the phones, so therefore they could get into all those accounts. So while she was grieving with some unimaginable loss as a young woman, she had to deal with this. So this case, negotiating a pre-indictment resolution, meaning this person is agreeing to plead guilty without a trial, and then actually being able to talk to the victim in this $175,000 loss case was one of the most meaningful days in my life, or at least as an assistant United States attorney. So that kind of gives you two cases on the ends of the spectrum, but as Martine said, really focusing on vulnerable victims, and that really hit close to home for me.
Thank you, Roger.
I think my most high-profile case right now is the prosecution of Ignite, which is a company that was operated by the father of a social media personality, Dan Bilzerian. But I think in terms of the case that is most interesting to me right now, it's an investigation, so I can only kind of give you some like sparse details. But in terms of targeting vulnerable populations, the victims are Indonesian, and I'm Indonesian. I didn't like hunt for this; it was presented to me. But I don't know too many Indonesian people in LA. I don't know any other Indonesian lawyers, and so I can like read emails and I can like understand them. And it's really, I have read the reports of like victims who like immigrated here from Jakarta, and I can like read their stories and like their dreams of making money on the stock market, and it like reminds me of my family. So that case is really meaningful to me.
Kelly?
Oh, she talked.
Oh,
So that hurt.
It's been a long day for me, so it's let's go beyond cases now. Let's talk about the reasons you all became AUSAs, as well as your path to becoming AUSA in this office.
I'll start. So I think like a lot of us, followed a pretty traditional path, which is I clerked for a judge, I worked at a very schmancy law firm, and then I came here after a couple of years. And I think that's probably true of a lot of folks here on this dais. But it's not the only path that we have incredibly successful AUSAs coming through. We look for a diversity of backgrounds and diversity in kind of the broadest sense. We really appreciate folks who come from DDA offices, folks who come from the California Attorney General's office, like Josh, folks who have military backgrounds, who have a ton of litigation experience as JAG attorneys. I know Martine has been looking for really qualified candidates who work in public interest organizations with strong litigation backgrounds. There's a lot of different paths that you can take to come to the U.S. Attorney's Office, either the civil division or the criminal division. I think the most important thing is your passion for the mission, which is to do justice without fear or favor. That's something that we really look for.
And Jay, you mentioned diversity. I mean, it's somewhat clear, but can you just briefly describe why diversity is important in an office like this?
Yeah, I mean, I think as Martine noted, we are the biggest district by population in the nation. And that spans geographies, urban, rural. We have really strong and racially diverse populations here. We are a border district, meaning we're very close to Mexico, meaning we get very certain types of cases. And that just means that the diversity of opinions and viewpoints and backgrounds and histories all matter. How one person sees a case is different than how another person sees a case. And our hope, at least in general crimes, is that you become friends with your fellow AUSAs so that when you get a case that comes in, you can talk about it with your friends who hopefully don't have the same background as you, and that creates both a more just but also a more focused prosecution to make sure that we do what we can for a client, which is justice in the United States.
As Solomon said earlier, I'm a proud San Gabriel Valley native. I grew up in Alhambra, and I wanted to join the office because I wanted to protect the community that I'm proud to call home. Growing up, I did see some gangs, and I also I lost a friend in high school to gang violence, and so that really steered me into violent and organized crime work. I knew my heart was always in public service. And so I took, I guess I did it in the opposite direction that most people do when they come to the office. So after law school, I went straight into a big law firm, but I was lucky to work with a lot of partners who were former AUSAs, and they talked about it being the best job that they ever had. But one of the things I hadn't done yet, but I really wanted to do, was a judicial clerkship. So after I was at my firm for about 2 to 3 years, I jumped ship and I went to go clerk. It was such an amazing experience, and I was in the Eastern District of California, so we had a ton of trials all the time. So that's where I got to see a lot of federal criminal trials. When I found out through friends that this office was hiring, I immediately put in an application. Honestly, at that point, I had a good friend in the office. That's how they introduced me to other people in the office, and I just started talking to more and more people. So I really encourage you to get to know people in our office. And so by the time I had gotten to my interview, I had spoken to like 30 different AUSAs who were either at the office or who had left the office. It was a little intense, but I think it helped. So yeah, I took basically a little bit of a slightly different approach, but I love the job. I love the people that I work with, and I am so lucky to be here.
I think you're gonna sort of pick up on a common trend. People don't kind of come into this role by accident. You need to really have a heart for public service. A lot of people, like I've had, my own personal experiences having parents who are immigrants, who don't speak the language, being taken advantage of when they tried to get their citizenship. The first agency that we went through, totally defrauded them, right? Stole the $5,000, and we, had to wait years to regain that money. And I wasn't naturalized until later in junior high because of this sort of thing that happened. So you see people who get taken advantage of. You want to stand up. You want to be an advocate for them. And I think you'll find that there's a lot of people in this office with some kind of personal story like that. And that means that you are going to be working with the best colleagues because they have the right heart, they want to do the right thing, they are hyper intelligent, and they decided rather than make the oodles of money that we could be making somewhere else, we'd rather do this. And so it's a really special place to work.
So I knew I wanted to be a lawyer from a young age, and I actually thought I wanted to be criminal defense, and I interned at the public defender's office in college, knowing that I wanted to be maybe criminal defense on the private sector or maybe a public defender for the indigent in our community. And that experience was kind of eye-opening. I learned a lot, so I wasn't in law school yet, but I dealt with defendants after their arraignment and got to interview them and work with investigators. And kind of seeing a couple different crimes and kind of flipped a switch in my mind, thinking, if I had to, I could probably zealously advocate for your defense, but some of these individuals, I thought, the other side might be worthwhile too, kind of prosecuting these individuals. I took some time off working in healthcare before law school, and then my first summer in law school, I externed for a federal judge in the Central District of California. I got to see some AUSAs in action. And I talked to the judge and the clerks, one of whom is an AUSA now here. It's like, wow, what is that job? How do you get it? And I think they mentioned, it's a federal prosecutor. I didn't know what a federal prosecutor was. No one in my immediate family was a lawyer. And they said this is not the only path, but law review, clerkships, big firm is one path. So after that experience, knowing I wanted to be a trial lawyer and not really thinking since college about what type of lawyer I wanted to be, that kind of flipped the switch. And I researched a little bit more, started talking with folks. I got a clerkship after law school, and I actually applied to this office, not under Martine, but was, as you say, ghosted. No response. So one message you may hear is, if at first you don't succeed, kind of try again. So years later, after working at a firm and able to represent defendants in private practice and kind of that limited government experience, I think has given me a good perspective. And I've always wanted to kind of give back to the community through different organizations. And this job definitely lets you do that. And since law school, it's been my dream job. It doesn't necessarily feel like that every day, but when you take a step back, it's really like, wow, I got to do that today. And I'm very fortunate to be able to serve my community in this way.
So I think you're going to hear a common theme as you get these answers. And the way I tie them all together is that we're an office of idealists. And sometimes the word idealist has a negative connotation. I don't use that in a negative way at all. We have people who are idealists in the sense that they truly believe in our country. They believe in our system of justice. They believe in people. They believe in their communities. And they also believe that they can make a difference and improve their communities. And those are the kind of people you have in this office. That is certainly why I came to this office. My parents came to this country from Guatemala. Guatemala is a country, when they came, was in the midst of a 30-year civil war, longest civil war in Latin America. It was a country that really had a justice system that only operated for the rich and the powerful, and not for the 99% of the people who really needed legal help, and a country that was not corrupted by people that had too much power and people who didn't care about others. And that, unfortunately, is not the case. That's why they came here. Coming from an immigrant family, we have great gratitude for this country, all the opportunities afforded by this country. We had a lot of gratitude both for the economic opportunities here, but also for being in a country free of corruption, one that had that greater ideal of justice for all. It doesn't always work that way, we know that. We know it's an imperfect system, but I certainly believe it's the best system in the world, which is why I wanted to become a lawyer. And that's what drove me to wanting to engage in public service, and that's what drove me to join the U.S. Attorney's Office, being able to have a role of that sort and help this country that has given so much to me, and have the privilege of standing up every day and saying, Martine Estrada on behalf of the United States of America. I have a commitment, unfortunately, at 6, so I have to head out, but the discussion will continue, and thank you all for coming. Appreciate it.
Now, as we all know, it's somewhat competitive to get hired in this office. I think I've personally applied 3 or 4 times before I got hired here. What do you all look for in prospective AUSAs, and what advice would you give law students or attorneys that want to join this office?
So, what we look for are a couple of things. The first is your ability to persuasively write. When people think about prosecutors, I think they think of like the courtroom and like doing a little dance before a jury. And certainly that is a very fun part of the job. It is certainly something that I super enjoy. It's something that I think is probably both the peak and the valley for the job. It's incredibly stressful, but also incredibly fun. But at the end of the day, your written work product, that's your advocacy. That's what the judge reads. That's what the judge is going to decide your motion on. That's what the judge is going to use to decide what evidence you use in your trial. And your ability to write persuasively is probably, as a threshold, the most important thing. Your oral advocacy is also super important. Kind of showing us what you've done during your career before applying to sharpen those oral advocacy skills. But I came from a big law firm. A lot of the other folks here came from a big law firm, and it's really hard to get those opportunities. So we want to see what you've done to try to do that, whether you've taken on a pro bono case to argue an immigration case, or you do Toastmasters, or you do something to really you take a deposition. And the last thing, and certainly not the least thing, is your passion and for public service and for the mission of this office, did you extern at the U.S. Attorney's Office or any U.S. Attorney's Office or the Public Defender's Office? Do you take on pro bono matters for which you may not get firm credit, but you do it because it is important to you? Are you a member of an affinity bar association that cares about the community that we serve, that seeks to use your legal skills for good? Those are all kind of different things that I would say we look for. In terms of timing, the kind of ballpark is between 3 and 6 years, but we've hired people who come straight out of clerkships. We have a program called the Honors Program where we hire people straight out of law school or out of clerkships, but sometimes if you do multiple clerkships, we'll hire you straight out of a multiple clerkship. Likewise, one of Josh's colleagues, who I also supervise, he spent 8 or 9 years at Skadden. So you're not aged out of the. That's just kind of the barometer. But we hire people who are super young. We also hire people who have a ton of experience under their belt. But your writing, your ability to persuasively write, is a pretty important thing.
I'll just note, it seems like we have a wide variety of backgrounds, that our office, even for college students, offers externships over the summer, and is able to work with a few. And then after college, we have a Justice Fellows program, which hires recent college grads for, I think, a 1 to 2 year program. So maybe before law school or before another job, it's a great opportunity. And then for law students, you can get, I used to be the law student extern coordinator. So either during law school, if you're local to LA, you can work full-time or 3 days a week during the semester for credit. It's great. I think we have a former extern in the audience here can tell you about our experiences. And then over the summer as well, you can work full-time as a law student extern, 40 hours, really get involved in trial teams, watch court, and just get to talk and know a lot of AUSAs. And I think I do interviews, and I think, like Jay mentioned, kind of a passion for public interest. Whether it's you're a college student, law student, or looking for a full-time AUSA position, kind of build that resume to show that your skill set is kind of aligned with the mission of the office. We know it's hard, especially if you're at a big law firm, to kind of make time for other things. But I think really got involved with APABA in 2015. That really helped me meet other AUSAs and also give back to the community. And like Jay mentioned, took on some pro bono matters, which not only helped me give back to the community, but in other ways gave me substantive stand-up courtroom experience so that I could talk about those during my interview with the office years ago.
Before we open it up to the audience, Susan Kelly, do you have anything about?
I'll just say one thing. This is the most basic one. You will be asked this question by every single person who interviews you, and that is, why do you want to be an AUSA? You should have you should do some real soul search, not to make it too serious, but you should do some real soul searching about that. I thought long and hard about it because it was not a given to me that being a prosecutor as part of the criminal justice system was what I wanted to do. And so I spent a lot of time wrestling with myself about that answer, and I think I came to a place that was very genuine and authentic and compelling. And so you want to have that reason for yourself, not just to impress the people in the interview, but to if you get the job, to sustain yourself in that job, because we've sort of talked about a lot of the high points, and there are many, but there's a lot of really hard stuff in the job too, right? The hours can be extremely long. Defense attorneys can be very nasty. Judges can scream at you. It just happens no matter what you do, no matter how perfect you try to handle something. And so you want to have the sort of fortitude and the commitment, the dedication to reminding yourself why you're doing it when things are tough.
Just one really quick practical tip. I would say when I was applying for this job, it made me realize how many different people from the different eras of my life came together to support me in my application. And I was so grateful for that. So I think it's just really important to all the different jobs that you've worked at, any judges that you've externed for or that you've clerked with, just, it's good to stay in contact with them, just keep them updated with what's going on. And so when you're finally applying to the office, I think it's helpful that they've heard from you, they remember you, and it makes it all the much easier for them to support your application.
Thank you. Let's open it up to the audience now. If you have any questions, just raise your hand.
First off, thank you for putting this panel together. It's very rare that you ever get a chance to meet with the representatives at the Department of Justice, so hats off to you guys for continuing that pattern. My question to all the panels is, when it comes to members of the public that wish to address and get a hold for matters that would fall under your jurisdiction, what does that process look like? And to give you some 2-second background on the context of why I ask, in the audience today, you will see many other victims of Scientology that are present, and I think pressing on the wheels of the Diddy case, as well as hearing some of you are child advocates, I think it would be very wise to add another button and success case to your many ongoing cases, especially as the iron is hot, so to speak. And I would love to hear how some of the members of the public can get a hold.
I'll actually take that on. I'm the first assistant U.S. attorney. This is obviously a recruiting event, and to talk about the work of the office, so thank you for coming. You can always write to the office. We actually typically don't take things on directly from the public. The way that we get our cases is that members of the public go to the FBI, HSI, other agencies. Those agencies look at it and then make referrals as appropriate, and that's how those things are handled.
Thank you.
Any other questions related to recruiting and joining the office?
Anyone can make my job easier.
I'd love to hear you all talk about what trial experience you had coming in, or what oral advocacy experience you had, and if you didn't have much, what got you to a point where you're comfortable doing trials?
So I had just a few years of experience. So at O'Melveny, I was able to work on the trial advocacy program. So we got to prosecute misdemeanors. A few cases where I got to argue against a motion to suppress in court and kind of put direct examination on an arresting officer on the stand. And then another pro bono matter, I was able to represent an elder victim, an individual who's a victim of elder abuse. So then I went to Stanley Moss and was able to argue there. I think you kind of take your opportunities where you get them. So you're not going to be able in court all the time. I use presenting to a partner or a senior associate maybe as my opportunity to be an oral advocate. You know, you're not standing up formally, but if you're able to concisely advocate for what you think we should do in this small piece of the case, or summarize as a young associate maybe thousands of documents into which are the 4 key documents, that is a small piece of oral advocacy. And I think that'll lead you well throughout your career. It's just not only how to deal with judges and juries, but how to deal with people. We deal with victims from all different spans of life. CEOs of companies who have been embezzled from, victims of sexual exploitation or other things, or that victim I talked about, right? I'm talking to that person in my own authentic way, but differently than I talk to a grizzled veteran of the FBI for 20 years. So being able to be yourself and be authentic, but be able to communicate with different members of the public, I think is very important. You kind of take those opportunities wherever you can get.
So when I applied to the office, I actually didn't have a ton of oral advocacy experience. I worked at a very, very big law firm, and I personally very foolishly decided to work in the white collar section because I'm like, oh, AUSA, white collar, that makes sense. And you find that a lot of big law firms do a lot of internal investigation type work, which lends itself to a ton of doc review. And so I was a little bit of a mercenary. So I found out that there's these 1983 panels where the district court looks for pro bono attorneys to handle folks who file civil rights claims. There's also something akin to that, for a Ninth Circuit panel, they look for pro bono attorneys. The firm didn't make that available to me. I fished it. I went onto the website, I got approval, signed up for it myself, I vetted the cases, took the case, presented it to the partner, found a senior associate to mentor me, and I argued the summary judgment motion. I drafted the summary judgment motion, the affirmative one. I also drafted the opposition to the summary judgment motion. So I kind of like spun my own straw into gold. But if you're just at a firm, I don't know if you are, I don't think you should have the expectation that if you wait, good things will come to you. You really need to go out and find those opportunities. I also did like mock trial for 7 years in undergrad and law school, and I think that kind of helped propel my interest into what I was looking for in a firm. But I would encourage you to be proactive in your career, not just in terms of getting oral advocacy experience. That's true of like everything in a firm. Find the partner you want to work for. There's like an AUSA, a former AUSA at the firm, you should fight to get cases with him or her. If there's, if there's like a there's like a case involving like medical malpractice and you have to depose 20 people, maybe after you prep 5, you talk to the partner like, hey, there's this person who's kind of like tangential, like could I take some of that deposition? And you kind of like build in your experience, and you've got to ask for it because a closed mouth doesn't get fed.
Thank you. Unless there are any more questions.
I think actually we've got the building closes at 6, and
Oh,
Aragon let us know that we need to clear out, so.
I see.
um,
Got it. All right. Well, thank you for coming. That's the end of it.